Wrecker, my brother. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Nick, man. I haven't seen you in a while. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's freezing here. It's like 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So I don't know what
Oh,
that is. That's like 15 or 20 below in Celsius, something like that. But in the United States right now, there is snow in New Orleans and in these southern areas, Florida, on our beaches in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. We have snow. It's
well,
like,
wait, do you have snow in Florida? Like the people
yes,
down there, they've never seen that. They probably
I
think
know.
that's some sort of cocaine like landing on their
It's
shores.
yeah, right. It's like deep snow in Florida, like snow that they've never seen. So yeah, that's what's happening here now. What's going on over there? Other than you shave your beard, so you have a very tiny bit of a beard now. So you have this beautiful youthful face. You're like you
Well,
look
thank you.
25.
Well, see what happens, like, and this is the perfect thing to do on a public podcast is my wife been begging me to cut my hair short again and get rid of the beard, and I didn't want to cut my hair short again, but I cut the beard, and she comes out and she like kisses me all over, and I swear to God, like
Nice.
after all this long time of marriage, I was like, whoa, I didn't get that many kisses in a long time, so I'll take
See,
that. So
so
yeah, off the beard.
forget
So I
the
shaved the
beard.
beard like a like a 2 day
Yeah.
whatever cut. Yeah.
Hey.
So, but I'll
Yeah. If
take
my
it.
wife decided she wanted to kiss me a bunch, I'd never have a beard ever. So yeah. Uh, for me, I don't think beards matter too much. All right. So, dude. What are we going to do? We have a whole new season coming up. This is our new. What are we going to do this year? We have some
This is the
guests
fifth
already.
round revision, right? That like the fifth year of the podcast, we're hitting the magic mark of 100 episodes, and we have a bunch of guests, right, for this season. We have more and more guests every year, and by now the people invite themselves.
Yeah. But what we should do is controversy.
Yeah,
So
fair enough.
I want
We've
to
been
have
too
some
nice.
controversy,
I
some
just,
debates. So we
yeah,
have Greenwood and Young Jin coming to debate the merits of econometrics and versus qualitative but then the problem is they want to be civil. They
yeah, I
want to
know.
be like nice to each other and young people listen, so they don't want to and Young Jin's like, we don't want people to think that the research they're doing is not good. And so he immediately wants to not be controversial.
Well, we'll see about this, but let's put this the other way. Like, what are the big controversies in our field?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I ran into recently.
Okay.
I'm an editor at MISQ and I run into this like once a month. But I get a paper and I look at it and it's cool and it's submitted to MIS Quarterly and I think, is this the right outlet? Does this belong? Is this an information systems paper? Is
You're
it a
talking about the
MISQ paper?
fitness. You're talking about
A
whether that
fit.
paper fits. Yeah,
Does it
let's talk about
fit
that. I
my
like it.
journal? So let's talk about fit. Does it fit my journal? Is it an IS paper? And as an editor, I have to make these decisions.
I know.
And everything now is digital. Like you name it. We just got Trump elected Trump. There's so much digital stuff there. I was at a football game. Notre Dame, the University of Notre Dame, was in the national championship of football, American football against Ohio State. We lost, but it was a beautiful thing. Digital tickets for the game, digital entry into my hotel. It's like nothing happens in the world without digital anymore.
That is true. And that leads to the situation that you described, right? That you get a paper and that's submitted to MIS Quarterly. So clearly, like people intended it for this audience. And it talks about digital. There's digital in the title, there's digital in the abstract, there's digital in the research model, whatever, right? So, and then the question, and I hear you, like, okay, is this now an IS paper? How do you make that decision?
Well, so it's always, of course, a number of things, but my
Yeah.
rule of thumb is, are they entering into an IS conversation?
Yeah,
And
I
I'll tell
do.
you what, the Foucault, this is the same Michel Foucault who wrote Discipline and Punish and all of that sort of thing. Well, in 1970, he wrote a book, and I don't even know what it is. We can put it in our notes. But this is one of the early things I read during my PhD. And what he said was that there's no, like, I always thought there's a difference in academic disciplines. Like, some are concerned with something, A, others are concerned with B. But he basically argued that there is no like topical difference among scientific disciplines. It's all about their discourse. So uh, it's essentially conversations. What are those conversations? And then later, Abbott, the sociologist, basically said that these scientific fields made jurisdictional claims. They claimed certain things as their jurisdiction.
As
Like,
we do, right? Digital
yeah,
is ours.
yeah. But so, for example, economics, used to be concerned with money, economic concerns. And if you look at
Or
some of the old stuff from
yeah, or
Schumpeter,
at least some sort of utility, right? So some
yeah,
sort of has to have some utility that we can maximize.
yeah, but Schumpeter actually says, we don't need, in like empirical economics, econometrics, he's like, we don't need measures of things because the thing we're looking at, which is money, is already a measure, right? So there was no, and now they study everything. They study psychology, but they call themselves economists.
So I give you an example. Like I hear what you're saying, and I have a counter argument to that as well, to this basic idea, because I see two problems with that. Before I get there, this morning on LinkedIn, I saw a post by someone that I didn't know, a marketing person. They published a paper in Journal Marketing that looked really interesting. It was about AI literacy and sort of like AI performance. And they sort of what they showed is the people that are not very AI literate, they turn to AI like ChatGPT. They don't know anything about it or how it works, but they turn to it expecting some magical wonders, and they sort of then get that right. But they look at it as a magic tool. And the people that are more literate about it, they don't have this sort of inflated expectation. And I thought, like, I like the studies, really well done, etc. And I was like, why would that be in journal marketing? Like, where is that connection to intention to buy, or like willingness to buy, or whatever,
Well,
right?
who
So
did they write? So that would be so again, going back to Foucault, to Abbott, to whatever, the thing I draw from that is, what is an academic field? Well, it's a discourse. And we might all study the same thing. An economist might study the same thing, but they would send it to an economics journal. An IS researcher would send it to an IS journal. A human computer interaction person might send it to the Chi conference, or something like that. And yet the phenomenon is the same. So how do you distinguish between disciplines? Well, who are they talking to? Which conversation are they entering? So it's not about the topic, it's about conversations,
I get
and it's
that.
about talking
But
to people.
here's my problem with that, right? So first of all, like from the topic wise, you could say, hey, you could have submitted that to ISR, like straight up, right?
Hmm.
Poof, right? So this is the phenomena doesn't live in the disciplinary structure we invented. Sure, right? Like,
Right.
So here's my problem with this conversation argument. I think there's a big difference between the conversation that you intend to enter and the conversation that you're actually in. Yeah, so I'll give you an example. Like, so I get these papers as well. Like, they're papers, they're about digital, they're submitted to MS Quality, they end up at my desk. And I'm asking, is this an IS paper? And I guess I look for the same proxies as you do. For example, I do check the literature that they're citing because there's a proxy for who they're talking to, right?
Yeah.
And then let's say, well, they don't actually cite any discourse happening in IS journals. So they don't cite IS persons,
Hmm.
IS scholars. They don't have a reference, I don't know, to Michael Barrett, to Young Jin, whatever, right? So they're not talking to these people. Oh,
Yeah.
and these people tend to publish in IS. So, and here's my dilemma. Now, it's very easy to say, I'm sorry, you're not talking to us, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But then I'm thinking, well, they picked MS Quality for a reason. Like, they
Mm.
want to talk to us. Well, they're not
Right.
like the stuff that they're citing. But if we always say no, even though they intend to talk to us, our discourse is always going to be exclusive and never get furthered because we can only then talk about the stuff we've already been talking about. You know what I
Well, I
mean?
mean, that's a pretty narrow view to say that if you're talking, that's like saying you and I only say the same thing to each other because we're the same two people. No, we learn and we read things and we hopefully move our, or maybe we do just say the same thing to each other over and over. But no, the point is this. So let's say someone submits a paper to me and I think it's a cool method, and it could fit. And I know that there's some hook in the IS discourse that they could talk to. Now, just because you're talking to someone doesn't mean you're agreeing with them entirely or you can't extend what they're saying. But you shouldn't ignore them either. So if they're studying something and I'm like, oh, here's this paper by Youngjin that already said that, then it's like, well, here's this paper by Youngjin that already said that. Go cite it and see how what you're saying extends it. That
My
would
view
be
is
one way. Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, my view was a little bit different. My view is not like you're saying something that we've already been saying in different words. My view was like what you have to say we haven't been talking about, but maybe we should listen to you, right? So the
Yeah.
conversation starter argument, like there are sometimes nice papers that bring a topic from outside the stuff that we talk about into our field. Like,
Yeah.
last year we gave that Trailblazer Award to Brad and Greenwood and Ted Matherly because they had a conversation start about digital technology in journalism, right? And like in the institutional press and all that sort of stuff. And I said, look, they're bringing journalism as an object of inquiry, as a phenomenon, or as a, whatever. Like they're bringing this into our discourse. We could say that that hasn't happened in IS so far. It happened in
Yeah.
journalism studies, right? So,
Yeah.
but if I go by the discourse argument, then and looking like, well, they haven't been talking to us. That's the whole point, right? The other people have talked about it, and they're bringing it here. Similar thing what Rick Watson did, like the environmental people. Everyone talks about them. We're not. We need to join that conversation, even though it's not part of our discourse yet.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. There's a little risk there because if you and those two examples that you just gave, say Rick Watson with Green IS and Greenwood and his gang with journalism, they're kind of steeped in IS. So when they say things about, when Rick Watson says this is what IS should do, he kind of knows because he's been around for a couple of decades at that point and knows the discourse and knows exactly. I think the danger. So first of all, I agree with you. So that's slightly different. Where you hook with IS and then go beyond it is what I'm talking about. You engage with the discourse. That doesn't mean you have to agree. That doesn't mean you have to say the same thing. It just means you need a hook that they're already talking about because you engage in a conversation. That's what I'm saying. That academic research is a conversation, and you have to listen to what people say before you go running your mouth and telling them things. And the thing I'm worried about is people will be in another field, and I get this a lot, and you probably do too. Now, I'm not talking about Rick Watson who knows the conversation and is saying we need to pay attention to this other thing. What I'm talking about is the random finance person or the random other
Yeah.
non-IS person that sees a list of top journals. They're writing, and I've gotten papers like this. They're
Yeah, I have
basically
to. I know
finance
what you mean.
papers,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Oh, it's about a digital technology. I'll send it to MSQ because that's like the top technology journal they think." And then they send it over, and it's like, "Wait a second.
You haven't
This
even
is
tried.
hitting
Yeah.
on topics we've hit on. This is you're not engaging in a conversation that is happening in these journals. You can't just come to us and tell us, what you know without listening to what we're saying. So it is a community and it is a discourse. And you can't ignore that community and that discourse. I don't think just in information systems, but in any journal. You go to strategic management, try and publish without reading strategy research. You go to Journal of Applied Psychology, try and publish something there without reading the psychological research in your area. You need to engage with the discourse that happens in journals.
In that journal. Yeah, I fully agree with it. I think that's a good point. I mean, the two takeaways are like, first of all, if you come out of the field and entering this other field, the onus will be on you to read that. Like you read a lot.
Yeah,
Like I had to read a lot of entrepreneurship stuff for the couple of entrepreneurship papers that I had. Like it's a sort of similar idea. Like I
exactly.
think there's some tech entrepreneurship where a little bit more attention to the digital. You have to
Hmm.
bring into the entrepreneurship. That my view is like we have to go there. We don't
Yep.
have to make them read our stuff. We have to write in their journals.
Right.
But that means I had to get all the way back to opportunity creation and Shane and Vecatterman and 30 years of entrepreneurship research, like the big themes, which is
Yeah.
cool because now I understand them. But boy, that's a lot of work. So that's the first thing. And I think the other thing is hooks are generally important. Like you always have to hook into a conversation. But I think what I'm hearing you say is here, the hook is particularly important. Even if you bring in a new conversation to another discourse, you still have to hook it in, which
Yeah.
makes that hook even more central in
Yeah.
your setup of your paper than in any paper, right? Any paper hook is a good thing, but here it's critical. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I do have another thing, and I'm curious about this methods.
Hmm.
So just on my way back from the championship game here, uh, I was talking to one of my colleagues, and we had this cool idea about a method that we in our group were uniquely positioned to think about and talk about, and it involves machine learning and theory and moving it forward. And it's like this would be a really cool method. So my question to you is this: one, are methods contributions, because this was his question to me. He's like, if we come up with this method, why is it then? And I'm like, we could send it to MISQ or something. And he's like, but if we come up with this method, why would it be an IS paper?
Yeah.
Wouldn't this be something else like organizational methods or and he's not a pure IS guy, right? He's like a statistician, but that was my one. So that's my first question to you, and then I have a follow up on methods. But yeah,
So
my
the first one is like, principally speaking, yeah, like, like method contribution can be in addition to the discourse in a particular field. I think, first of all, they're very difficult. A second, I think that comment about okay, it has to connect to the discourse, like to the phenomena that we're interested in. So I immediately thought about that FCQCA paper by Young Key Park a couple of years
Yeah.
ago, right? So your
Yeah, totally.
configurational methods. But if you look closely at that paper, I think if you remember correctly, it's set up by pointing out the complexities of digital phenomena that make configuration method particularly suitable,
Yeah.
right? So all of a sudden, this is a nice paper. If it just talks about like what all the stuff you can do with configurational methods, you probably say like go to organizational research method, submit it there, right?
Yeah.
But now that he says like digital phenomena from there inducing a need for a particular method,
Yeah.
then that's a thing, right?
And that's kind of like, so there was my methods paper, the data-driven computationally intensive stuff
Yeah.
in 2019 with Hani and Stefan. And I look at that and I think I probably did a good job. We got one best paper and everything. So why did we do a good job? Well, number one, we said it's data-driven and data,
Yeah, like
and
trace
IS
data. And that was
researchers.
a key. That's a digital phenomenon. All the digital technologies leave traces. What
Yeah.
do we do with these traces?
So IS research is particularly well positioned to. So that was one of our arguments. But then the other thing we did is we dug deeply into three papers, one of my own and then two others in the back end. One was an ISR, one was an MISQ, and one was an org sci, but it was Hani's paper with Emma Vost, and it was computation. So we took three published papers and we analyzed the way they did it to infer our method or our approach to this. Now, what I see happening, and a couple times these get submitted to me, is people have an idea for a new method, but they don't, it's not published yet. Like other people have not done the method and they have not done the method, yet they're proposing a method and then they give an illustration in the back of their paper.
Yeah, that's
Here's a new
these are.
method.
Yeah.
What do you think of those?
I think they're just incredibly hard to publish because you can. It's like a theory paper without data. You can. It's so easy to shoot them down.
Yeah. And my initial, you know what my initial knee jerk is? Why do it once or twice first? And
Yeah.
but
Then
there's
come
the chicken and or egg issue because how am I going to publish
a
using this
paper
method
with an unaccepted method. You need to.
without referring to
You
the
need to
paper that
legitimize the
describes them?
method to apply it, but you can only legitimize the method by applying it. That's the
Yeah.
conundrum, right? Right. So
Yeah.
this is difficult. I mean, like the way out of it is you need some very experienced authors on the team because, like, in a way, like, so I think that the theory without data analogy kind of holds. Like
Yeah.
it's the same as like publish a design theory without any artifact, publish a theory without any empirics. These are goddamn hard, and there's a good reason why sometimes very good and experienced writers and senior scholars they
I have trouble.
they trouble, but they are probably the best. It's just really difficult to put them on, to pull that off. So that's
Yeah.
the first thing that I thought. You know what? Like your data driven computation intensive, like the ISR paper. See, on the one hand, yeah, it's an ISR paper because it connects to digital phenomena. I get that, but isn't it also sad, like, because it has so much broader applicability,
Yeah.
like and you're limit because the fact that it's now an ISR is actually limiting its uptake.
Yeah.
Data-driven computation-intensive theory construction is everywhere in the social science, but they're not
Yeah.
going to know it because let's face it, a sociologist doesn't know your paper in ISR,
No, and
right?
people are recreating it. They're
The only way
recreating
it
it in
would get
different
there is
ways
by
using
thousands
different.
of citations, and then it would pop up in their Google Scholar search.
Yeah. So there have been a couple people. One way back, Amrit Tawana told me I should write one of those little sage books, those little methods books.
These handbook, no, what are they called? Yeah, I know what you mean, like the pocket
Like
ones. Yeah,
the Yin book or the
yeah, it's
Develis
really
or
nice and short. That's why it's so great. It's
yeah,
100 pages.
yeah. So that's one idea. Another one is people have suggested I submit something to organizational research methods and to try and do things.
It would have
But
more
it's like,
uptake.
hmm?
It would have had more uptake because
Yeah,
everywhere outside of CTO or IAS, people don't really like. I'm reviewing for AOM at the moment, right? And I'm
yeah,
reviewing in CTO, but I'm also reviewing in TIM and ENT, like a
yeah,
bunch of them. So everywhere outside of CTO, like I got everything with digital in the name, sure.
yeah,
And a lot of these papers in symposia, they have to argue the interest to multiple divisions. You know what? Like no one ever mentions CTO. It's still a little second grade cousin there. They all say like, oh, this is digital and it's important to the strategy people and it's important to the TIM people. I'm like,
yeah,
what about CTO? Like,
yeah,
like it doesn't even appear in many people's mind. I think for historical reasons, but I still think it's a fact.
yeah. Yeah, I mean it is what it is, but you'll see other ones. Yeah, it's all about discourses and communities, and And CTO and Tim are the two that kind of explicitly hit technology. The difference between those two divisions is that Tim is very much a kind of, well, all right, again, it's a big tent, so there's a huge overlap. But they tend to be like the innovation scholars
Yeah, more
that
so than
came
the
up
tech stuff.
outside of, whereas CTO was born out of information systems and communications. So it's like you got the innovation scholars, you have the information systems, and of course, in the Venn diagram, there's a huge
There is
overlap. But
overlap, yeah, absolutely. Hey, I want to go back to this original question that we asked about fitness, right? Like, why would a paper fit to, our journals, for example? And we now talked about discourse. I want to give you a different spin on the same thing.
hmm,
A second spin on the topic is this classic old notion of the idea artifact.
yeah,
Right? Is the idea artifact in there somehow? Like back in the day, there was, we talked about this a couple of times. There was this core of the field debate, and people proposed the IT artifact should be at the core of the field, and then other people said like we need a different artifact at the core, or we don't need a core at all. So long
yeah,
story short, we know by now that we don't really have an IT artifact at the core, and we don't really
yeah,
have a core of the discipline. We have this marketplace of ideas, but
yeah,
but see, when I started, I was always on the fringe because I was in this process management, process modeling, and
yeah,
I was on the bad side of the artifact debate because there's no really an IT artifact there, right? The
hmm,
model of a process that's supposed to be supported by an information systems that is yet to be built. Like I got a lot of these desk rejects for there's no ID artifact. This is not an IS paper. I got that a lot.
yeah,
Right. So at that time, I was like, gee, I really don't like this.
yeah,
So
yeah,
as I changed topical direction, right, I no longer do this and I moved into digital innovation, these sorts of things. But also, I think the idea artifact has changed as well, right? We no longer
yeah,
talk about the database structures on case
yeah,
tools and SAP systems of the 90s. We now
yeah,
have the digital object as the idea artifact. And
yeah,
now that the artifact has changed, I find myself using, like in my own head as an editor, I like papers that have this digital object at their core and
uh,
incorporate that into their theorizing. So
yeah.
in a way, like I'm not saying we need a core, but I do like having this digital artifact at the core of papers. You know
Yep.
what I mean? Like I think you could even revive that debate because the nature of the artifact that could or should be at the core is different in my view.
Well, it's a tough one because if you look at business schools, which information systems kind of came out of business schools, and it grew with the IT discipline, right? Our executive is the chief information officer. And really, the concerns of IT people were our concerns. So things like adoption of technology, things like implementation of
Things
technology,
like development, yeah, absolutely.
development of technology. So if it fell into one of those or strategy, technology strategy,
Oh,
alignment,
return on investment, right? So
yeah,
what do we get out of investing into IDT department? What's the ROI? Yeah.
yeah. So that's like the foundation of IS. And then what's happened now is the a lot of what we learned or a lot of the perspectives we took around, say, agile development. The people are using agile when they're not developing software now, right? There's
Yeah.
agile strategies and things. Uh, Artifacts. Non-IT folks are building mobile apps, and that's the whole digital thing. And they're digitizing products, and so a lot of the domain of where digital technologies, where a lot of the things we know, is not just in IT anymore. So now the question is, do we want to take our field and say no, we're just focusing on the IT function? And hell no, that would
No.
be silly. So we have to move it. We have to draw it out elsewhere. And I frankly say there are no bounds. I'm not one of those believers in the IT artifact. I've gotten papers. I got a paper rejected at MIS Quarterly because there was no IT artifact. And it's
Yeah.
about IT project escalation.
Yeah.
And I ended up publishing it in JMIS, but this was a couple years back. But to me, IT project escalation is one of the fundamental things that we play with, and it's
I know what you
clearly
mean.
within the discourse.
Last year we had a paper we just got a paper accepted which is about an IT consultancy company that
Mhm.
employs people on the autism spectrum disorder.
Oh, I
Right?
saw that paper with Olga.
Yeah,
That's a
about
beautiful
Oricon.
paper.
Really
Olga
cool.
sent it to me.
Anyways, oh, she
That
did.
is
Yeah,
a cool
it's a
paper.
cool
Really
case.
important.
Yeah. So anyway, so in the review process, at some stage, someone said, "Well, this is not about IT, like not an IT artifact," which is true in the case. Like we don't look at any software that they use.
It's IT help centers.
I wrote this long response saying like, "Oh Jesus Christ, can we not? This is an IT consulting. This is about IT practice. This is about the people that do IT work every freaking day. How can this not be? How can this not be a paper that fits to an IS journal?"
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was a little bit angry in the response. We toned it down towards the end, but
Yeah.
that was my point. It's like, Jesus Christ, can we get away with this debate?
Yeah.
Well, we should publish this, right?
Yeah.
Are you really
Yep.
saying this is not an IT paper? We should take it elsewhere?
Yeah. Well,
Because
I
it's a
mean,
cool case, yeah.
so Kalle Luutinen and John King wrote that paper where they talked about the marketplace of ideas, and they were responding to the people who say that there's a core. And I think it's one of those things where, and I like Supra's paper where he talked about IS
The
as an
axis of
axis
cohesion.
of
Yeah, I
cohesion
like that
around
too.
sociotechnical. So it's like every paper doesn't have to be perfectly sociotechnical. We can have some more technical, we can have some more socio, but the marketplace is key, isn't it? It's not if you in any way are socio or technical or socio-technical, you're in. That's not the argument. The marketplace argument is if there's a demand for what you're selling. That's the beauty of a marketplace. So what do I have to do? I have to make what I'm selling, which is my paper, appealing in my findings. I need to make it appealing to the customer. And in this case, the customer is the journal and the community that reads and writes in the journal. So that marketplace of ideas means I don't think we want to have a very, yes, conceptualizing the artifact is a good way to make sure you're an IS paper. But if you don't conceptualize the artifact, you're weakening yourself. So you better have something else. It better be a method. It better be abstracting out from the phenomena to some phenomena that we can hook into. There are a number of different things, but I think you need to make your product sellable to that marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The way that I look at the axis of cohesion, and what I'm a big fan of, like personally in the work that I do, is it really this socio-technical theorizing at the core, which I always interpret like there's a social, like one of the bubbles has to be about a social practice or something, and then there's a theoretical concept that talks about the technical, right? So like the eye repair paper that you mentioned, like if you look at this, this is a dialectic process model, but it has social practices like regulatory moves and stuff like this, and it has the changes to the freaking iPhone itself, like
Yeah.
technical changes.
Material
Both
changes.
of these boxes are in the theoretical model, and there's arrows, going to and fro, whatever. So in my interpretation, this is always socio-technical theorizing. There's a box that speaks to the technical and a box to the social. This is not to say this is the marketplace. You can be more about the social. Like the Oricon paper doesn't have an IT box. It's mostly about the social, like the institutional practices we have about how do we hire people, how do we, compensate people, how do we develop people at work that do IT. So this is in the axis of cohesion more on the social side of things, and of course there's other people that are very deeply in the technical side of things, which is also cool. I'm just saying, like
Well,
I have a hankering for the things in the middle.
in your paper, just to give a summary, people might not know what we're talking about, but you basically pointed out that these folks with autism actually are really well suited to doing IT help desk support,
Well,
right?
and, not just help desk support, but there's certain types of consultancy that they're really good at, which is why this case of Auticon is a very successful globally operating consultancy company. And they're specializing in certain consultancy services where they think that people on the spectrum with their particular abilities are really, really good at. And that's
Yeah.
interesting in itself. And then, of course, they still have the issue that like client firms don't necessarily know how to deal with these people, and so they have another interesting role. They call them job coaches, but they're kind of like a broker or a mediator role. Anyway, so it's just run differently, and we thought this is an interesting case to look at and systematically describe. It's not very theoretical. It's just like, here's an interesting case. We looked at this closely. This is what they do and how they do things, and this is where they're different and not, or whatever. And I'm very happy to see it out. And the cool part, of course, was first of all, it's written with Audicon people. Like there's there's a director from Switzerland, and one of the co-authors is on the spectrum themselves, which is also cool, right? So it's really also from their voice.
That is very
Anyway,
cool.
nice little paper comes out soon, I guess. Yeah, with all
Good.
that.
All right. So wait, Recker, what did we decide? What we as editors, so we talk about, we're kind of fuzzy. If you're kind of addressing and entering the conversation if you have the artifact that makes it stronger, but we're not requiring the artifact necessarily if you're entering. Methods are okay, but ideally someone's published from the method before, and that makes it easier. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg issue there. Uh, when do we reject a paper? So the only time we reject a paper is when they don't have a believable hook to existing conversations,
Look, I mean, like there are these
for
clear,
lack of
like to
fit.
me, there are some clear-cut cases. The ones that you mentioned before, like they don't even try. Like they just like very often I get papers that were submitted to, I don't know, let's say management science somewhere or JOM or job operations, good rejected and straight up resubmitted to MIS Quarterly. And
Yeah.
like and that shows. I mean, it really shows if you haven't even bothered to look if there's a single related paper, and you don't even bother to look.
Yeah, and we're not talking about just a couple of methods papers that you cite or maybe something in the back. No, you need
Yeah, or
to
something
attend.
that that you can clearly see that they spent 5 seconds on doing the Google Scholar search like ISR, whatever the phenomenon is, and whatever pops up they put into the introduction. Like a clear tell side is they cite some IS papers on page one,
Yeah,
and then none throughout the rest of
nothing
the
else.
paper. Like they
Yeah,
changed the introduction, that's about it. So these
yeah.
ones I'm rejecting, to be honest. I'm like, I'm sorry, you don't care, I don't care, right? So this
It's
is
not a
the
good fit. You could have the
no.
grade, or I look at it in a situation like that and I think, ooh, but these empirical results are really interesting, or this case is so here, look at these, and I'll give you a high risk revision or something. So even with those, sometimes, but probably not. Probably I just go, look, lack of fit. This probably belongs in another journal.
I mean, like you can flip this around if you're thinking about is that my paper suitable for a journal in particular discipline. So first of all, if do you
Mm.
can you see in your paper that there is a conversation from that target audience that you're targeting, and do you have a
Mhm.
hook into this? These are two questions you can ask yourself as an author, right?
Yeah.
So like when I write for an entrepreneurship journal, I need to, in my paper, very early on, I need to say, this is something you're talking about, and this is what I have to
Yeah.
say. You could do
Yeah.
both of these things, you can check whether you have the conversation, whether you hook into this or not. So these are two
Yeah.
parts, right? And they
Yeah.
show in the reference list and all that sort of stuff, but it's a more general question. For an IS paper, I would add to that, is your paper about sociotechnical phenomena? Because that's a clear tell sign,
Yeah.
right? Because all of the other fields up usually only social, and of course if you go into the other side, the computer, then it's only technical. We're the
Yeah.
only field that is social-technical. So if what you're doing
Well,
is
unless you
actually
want to
social,
more broadly, like there's computer supported cooperative work, there's HCI, and one could argue that they are IS-ish, but
they are
most,
okay,
in the
fair enough,
US at
right?
least, they're in different journals.
But I want to put it the other way. If you think your work is clearly socio-technical, that's a good. It's not a sufficient, but it's a very good indicator that your paper could indeed be of interest to this audience, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think rejecting for lack of fit, and I don't necessarily do this because lack of fit is not something I usually say, although I do sometimes, and I did recently. But usually for me, I think to myself, can I turn this into an IS paper? And if so, then I reject them based on their problem with the contribution. Like someone else already said this, or so sometimes when they're not engaging with their conversation, they at a certain level of abstraction, what they're saying has been said, and they just haven't read it. So I'll reject for that, uh, inattention to existing literature when really the problem is kind of that fit thing. But usually, I mean, clearly I'll reject for some other reason, and that's
Okay,
that.
let me add one more question to you, Nick, because you actually asked me that question in the last episode of last year, and I didn't really answer it. But you asked whether does an IS paper have to be about business?
Hmm.
Like we talked about this in the context of this digital journalism paper, where you could say, well, maybe journalism business organization, but actually it's about journalism, right? So, does an IS paper have to be about business? Does it have to be in a business context with a business outcome variable?
So instead of saying business, let's say organization.
Okay,
Because I think
organization.
most people, even in management school, because MIS Quarterly has the word management in the title of right, Management Information Systems. So there's always this implication that you're talking about an organizational context or organizational. So it may be a business, but it may be a nonprofit, and it may be a government agency. And I think we're comfortable with all of those in information systems at this point. So it's not just business, but it's an organization. Now, your bigger question, I think, or my bigger question is, do we need an organization, or did we evolve? Like I think 20 years ago, you kind of did. business people. And if it was a purely psychological experiment with students or something, unless you can argue that this has some organizational external validity, you would have to go send it to a psychological journal or something. But
What about you remember the mood experiments on Facebook, the mood contagion effect experiment?
uh,
They went through the press 10 years ago because
uh,
there was no ethical consent or whatever. But what about that? Is that a
yeah, and
nice
then
topic?
there's the political polarization one that won best paper, and it's about bubbles, whatever,
Your filter bubbles and echo
filter
chambers.
bubble. Yeah, and it's like, well, that's not organizational
What
necessarily.
about
So,
what about a study? I remember it's like handling a paper that was basically about what social media exposure does to the mood of adolescent
uh,
teens, like
yep,
school kids, and how they feel about
yeah.
themselves and
Yeah,
stuff.
is that
Is
an
that a
IS?
nice topic?
It's Jonathan Haidt's work well, I mean, so I would say it doesn't need an organization, but I always thought organization or community. I just published a paper this year on Reddit. Reddit's
It's not very Disney.
and it's an MISQ and it's about bots on Reddit and their impact on human to human interaction. And and then I have another paper coming out next year, and it's all about political polarization, right? Engaging with the Johnson Kitchens
So
type.
what I'm hearing is no, you don't. Like you don't need
Yeah, I guess
paper,
we
but
don't. And you know what? I was raised that way. So I was raised at least thinking it has a management organizational aspect to it. And here I am writing papers that don't. And
that don't.
communities, and I've evolved that way. I've never done it consciously.
And to
But
be
I
honest, I
guess,
like that fact. Like I would agree with this, and I like this trend because
Mhm.
because this is another one of these signs that we move away from the IT function in the firm, and we always make the argument digital is everywhere. It's the hottest topic, and it applies to everything. It does. So we should look at more. And I also like the fact that it gives us a greater variety of dependent variables beyond value, success, adoption, and performance. These are like the five main variables of the 90s. And now we can look at other things like polarization. If you want, you can do inclusion, whatever, emotional states, physical states. Like we're doing some interesting work here with my team around like bodily implication. Like what does technology do to our body? You
Yeah.
know, uh,
Oh,
I
that's
think
cool.
I think
I
that's
think
kind of
we answered
interesting.
our question. We don't need an organization. We don't need a business. But then does that mean anything goes?
No.
So, I mean, anything goes as far as domain. Can we study? I mean, there are certain domains that we don't want to. So I'll tell you this. There are people who get emotional. So, for example, pornography. No one, you study that, you're not going to get published. No one has
My
an
view
appetite.
is why isn't it like I've said for a long time like this is the biggest application of the internet technology is for porn.
Yeah,
Why
the
isn't there more
data.
research on porn? Like why don't we do research on porn on the
I don't
the
know.
websites and the
Well,
dark
I'll
web and
tell
all
you
that
why
sort
we
of
don't do
stuff?
research on pornography. Do you want to be the guy who does research on pornography?
It's
Uh,
about because we're all timid.
it's not timid. It's first of all, it's objectifying women primarily. It's a lurid right there. There's a lot of negative ethical associations with pornography,
Yeah,
and
so
it's just
pornography is a
distasteful. Our
problematic area,
sensibilities.
isn't? Wouldn't that be a key reason to do research on it? Like
Yeah,
I'm
but
not
our
doing it myself either,
sensibilities are
but
such that I mean, we don't do research on assassinations on the dark web either. There are certain things that I suppose if you're a crime researcher or something like that, but I think it's just a matter of taste.
by the way, like
If you're
when
a
I was
civilized
CIA.
human being, there are certain things you don't get
Yeah,
yourself
maybe.
involved
When
with.
I was CIS editor in chief, I remember executing a paper that was basically about the what was it about? How sort of bad organizations use dark web to build covert networks and stuff like this. Really
Yeah,
interesting stuff. And
yeah.
just a little shout out. I know that CIS is now doing a special section, like a special issue, on taboos in information system
Oh,
research, like the
geez.
topics that we don't talk about ever. Right. I
Yeah.
wonder whether they think about pornography. I just saw the call for papers out there. Maybe if people are interested in saying something about the topics we never say anything about, that seems like a good place to go.
Yeah. All right. Well, good luck with that. Uh, anyway, listen, my brother, we're off to a new season.
We're off to a new season, season number 5. Absolutely. Good to be back.
Yeah, and we hopefully what we're saying is Anything goes as long as you engage with the conversation, you do good work, you do good research. We're
It's
not
like the
really creating
podcast.
bounds for
Submitting to a
topics.
journal is like the podcast. Anything goes as long as it's a good conversation.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Perfect. All right, people, we are back. We have some really interesting new guests coming up, lined up. You get your bi-weekly dose from here on in. You know the spiel by now. Nick, it's good that we're still on, that we're still doing this.
Yeah, we
And
are.
I'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Later, my brother.